Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Accessibility Learning webinar mini-series that's really focused on tools for remote work. My name is Sean. I'm an escalation engineer on Microsoft's Enterprise Disability Answer Desk, which really supports enterprise customers with a lot of our products. Before we start, I do want to make sure everyone knows we have captioning available. To access that, you can open a link in your web browser and navigate to aka.ms/webinar captions.
Thanks, Sean. My name's Crystal, and I manage our operations for our Disability Answer Desk. Sean and I are going to be your moderators for today's webinar. So before we get started, I kind of want to remind us why we're here today. It's really a part of our mission to empower everyone. And we've heard from you, one way we can do that is to provide training. Lots and lots of feedback on how we can provide training on our products. So last year, starting in January 2019, we launched a 12-part webinar series. This was a great success, and we heard lots of great feedback from you around additional topics that you'd like. In fact, starting in March of this year, we heard specifically asks around getting more training on using Teams and working remotely. We know this is definitely probably a response to COVID-19 and a lot of organizations around the world moving to remote work. We ourselves have been working remote since early March, and we really thought this could be an opportunity for us to share some of the learnings we've had using Teams and working remotely. So we decided to launch a mini webinar series. And so today, I'd like Sean to go ahead and talk about the topic we're going to have.
Sure. Thanks, Crystal. So I do want to give a little bit of a heads up on today's format as well. So we have about an hour, and we'll split this up into two parts. First, Kelly Ford, who's my colleague on our Enterprise Disability Answer Desk, will demo using a screen reader and a lot of other features in Teams. And then we'll have a period for Q&A with some of the top questions that we've been receiving from you all over the last few months. And I do want to let you know that today's session is recorded, so if you do need to drop out or miss part of the session, we'll make sure a link's available soon after the event.
Great. Thank you, Sean. And as Sean mentioned, we will have opportunities for you to ask us questions during the webinar. So please feel free to email those to accwebinars@microsoft.com. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Kelly.
Thank you, Sean and Crystal. My name is Kelly Ford. I'm part of the staff of the Enterprise Disability Answer Desk with Microsoft. I've been around accessibility in Microsoft for quite a long time, and looking forward to sharing some information with you all today on how to use Microsoft Teams. I'm using the JAWS screen reader. Teams works fine with other screen readers, screen magnifiers, and assistive technology, including our own narrator, NVDA, the products from Dolphin, and many others. So let's start talking about Teams.
Kelly Ford, Microsoft Teams.
I hit the JAWS hotkey to read the window title just to make sure I'm in Microsoft Teams. And I am. So we're going to start with what I consider kind of the important hotkey for Teams, which is Control E. I like to think of that as my go home base key. It takes you to a search box, but the other thing that it does is it takes you to a very predictable location for tabbing, so you can always start at a safe spot.
Search region, combo box, type /rat for a list of commands, edit combo.
So I hit Control E and we hear that we're in a search box. And then you might be wondering, well, what all can you do in Teams? So Teams has a range of functions and features that you can do, and we're going to look at a few of those. It has the ability to chat, to share information in what are called teams, calendars, calls, file management, and much more. If we start at the search box that we're in and we hit tab once,
profile, app settings, and more, button menu, your profile picture.
There we heard something about profile, app settings, and more. That is an area you probably won't go into too often, but it's where you can
Menu. Set status message. Current stat.
make different adjustments, like your status,
Set status message. 3 of save messages. Browse the list of your saved messages.
look at saved messages,
Settings. 5 of 10.
settings, which we'll explore in a bit.
Zoom out. 1 of 3.
Zoom, we'll talk about that.
Zoom in. Zoom reset. Keyboard shortcuts. 6 of 10.
Get a list of keyboard shortcuts.
About the application. Submenu. 7 of 10.
Also about the application, if you do contact our Enterprise Disability Answer Desk, we'll definitely ask you to go here because we're going to ask you for details about the version of Teams and things like that. We'll come back to a few of these things in a bit.
Leaving menus. Profile.
I hit escape and I'm going to hit tab again.
App bar. Use up or down arrow keys to navigate through the.
There we heard Jaws start to talk about the app bar. So this is one way to get around to the various areas of Teams. I'll use up and down arrow.
Teams toolbar toggle button.
So I heard Teams,
Chat toolbar toggle button pressed.
chat, and that one said button press. So because I was in the chat area of Teams.
Activity toolbar toggle button.
There's also something called activity, which is a feed of information, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Chat. Teams toolbar toggle button. Calendar toolbar toggle button.
Calendar and more. The way that you pick one of these items is, again, arrow to it. So we'll go back up to activity
Activity toolbar toggle button.
and press enter.
Pressed. Feed is selected. Loading more messages. General accessibility testing. Microsoft Teams. Main window. Accessibility testing. General channel content. Main region. Start a new conversation. Type at to mention someone. Edit.
So you go to the list for that area.
Teams and
Now I'm jumping around for a second because I want to also show you something else. You can say, hey, I don't want to tab to that list and arrow. Teams supports direct hotkeys. So if I also can hit Control 1
feed is selected. Loading more messages.
to get to my feed.
Back button. New chat button. Feed is selected. Christopher McMillan has removed unknown user and 0.
So then I can arrow up and down the list of items in the area that I'm in. In this case, the feed can be configured to show you a range of information. We'll talk about that in settings, and you can arrow up and down and kind of read what's been going on. Depends how you like to work. This may or may not be exciting for you or useful. It's not an area I use overly often myself, but I do want you to know that it's here. We're going to now hit Control 2.
Kelly Ford. Chat list navigation region. Chat list preview. Pin chats under recent tab closed. 1 of 2.
And again, we're in our chats. So we have a list of chats. First of all, you heard it say pin chats closed.
Recent chats open. 2 of 2.
And now we hear recent chats.
Chat. Teams echo. Status unknown at 9:46 a.m.
Teams Echo was a test call that I made.
1. Chat. John at Microsoft.com. Chat. Teams echo. Status unknown.
CR John or Krajan
Chat. John.
was a message I had sent to Crystal.
Chat. Teams. Recent chats open. 2 of 2. Pin chats under recent tab closed. 1 of 2.
But the pin chats,
0. Pin chats under recent tab open. 1 of 2. Chat. Kelly Ford. In a call. Last message from Kelly.
I sometimes, I guess, like to talk to myself. The account I'm using, as you'll notice in a second, is called Teams Demonstration. On a second computer, I have an account for myself, and I've set up some chat messages. I'm going to go over to the other computer and
message from Kelly Ford. How is the webinar going?
so I just sent myself a new message.
Chat. Kelly Ford. In a call. Last message from Kelly. Be ready. 11:14 a.m. Press. Recent chats open. 2 of 2. Chat. Kelly Ford. In a call. Last.
Now, if I want to take part in that chat, I have to hit enter because that will select the chat.
Kelly Ford. Chat content. Main region. Type a new message. Edit. Edit.
And you heard when I pressed enter, it put me in the edit box. So I want to talk to, again, myself, Kelly, and I could reply to that message. But if I've already forgotten what the message said, I can hit Shift Tab once.
Message from Kelly Ford. How is the webinar going? Sent today at 12:40.
And I can now read that message. If I hit up and down arrow,
Important message from Kelly Ford. Be ready. Sent today at 11:14 a.m.
you heard that one say it was important. and it said be ready. So I'm reading my chat messages, and now I know what I want to say back.
Message from Kelly.
I can either tab to the edit box or hit C.
Type a new message. Editing edit.
And focus will go to the chat edit box. Let's type a message back.
Caps lock on. Caps lock off.
I heard the beep sound from JAWS, and kind of a common feature in many screen readers that I had caps lock on.
Oh, S blank blank. Sending ... Message sent.
So I hear that my message was sent, and we don't have audio on the other computer, but if I was to go back to the other computer, I could read it. I want to talk a little bit about the chat edit box and what's going on. So by default, it's fairly straightforward. You just type messages, and you can press enter to send them. From the edit box, if we hit tab once.
Menu, actions menu, format. Press enter to expand compose box and format your message. Press right arrow for more options button.
So we heard you talk about format and then a bunch of options, right or left arrow to get some other options, or also you can go into formatting. So this has the ability to do full rich text editing, tables, lists if you so choose.
Set delivery options. Press enter key to activate and left or right arrow keys to navigate.
I hit the right arrow, and let's see a couple other things you can do with your message.
Leaving menus. List box. Standard message delivery selected.
So by default, a message would use standard delivery.
Mark message as important. 2 of 3.
You'll recall when I was arrowing through the list of chats, one of the messages said that it was important, where I had written be ready. So here's how you do that. You can say, hey, this is important. There's another interesting option. If we go down once more.
Mark message as urgent and repeatedly notify recipient every 2 minutes for 20 minutes. 3 of 3.
Hopefully you don't use this one too often, unless it's really urgent, because what that said is it will mark the message as urgent and notify the person who you're trying to talk to every 2 minutes for 20 minutes. Just be aware that
Menu, actions menu, set delivery options.
Functionality is there. I hit escape to close the delivery options.
Attach. Use left and right arrow keys to navigate.
If you want to attach items,
OneDrive.
again,
1 of 2.
press enter. We can attach things from OneDrive.
Upload from my computer. 2 of 2.
Or upload from my computer.
OneDrive.
And in some other parts of Teams, you can add other storage systems, and they would also show up here.
Actions menu. Attach. Choose an emoji. Press enter key to activate and left or right arrow.
Our favorite thing in, I guess, the internet age, we can also choose emojis and have those added to our messages. There's other options here as well.
Choose a Giphy. Press enter key.
What Teams calls a Giphy.
Choose a sticker. Press enter key to activate left or right arrow keys to navigate.
Just be aware this is here. We can hit Shift Tab and get back to the edit box.
Leaving menus. Type a new message. Editing edit.
Or if we were to tab.
Menu. Actions menu. Form. Send button.
We can send our message. You don't have to go to this. Again, you can just press enter.
Format. Leaving menus. Type a new message. Editing edit. Message from Teams demonstration. So far so good. Sent.
A couple other things about messages and these lists in general. I'm a big fan of the context menus in software. And so I can press Shift F10.
Context menu. Leaving menus. Kelly Ford Microsoft Teams main window. Kelly Ford chat.
And
type a new message.
often
Edit.
get
chat list navigation region. Chat list preview.
things.
Chat Kelly Ford in a call.
So I hit Control 2 to go back to my list of chats. In this case, and now if I press Shift F10,
list box. Mark as unread. 1 of 5.
I can mark a chat as unread.
Unpin. 2 of 5.
So I've pinned myself to the top of my chat list. If I was tired of talking to myself, I could unpin.
Mute. 3 of 5.
I can mute a chat so that if I don't want to be disrupted by it for a while, I can mute that chat.
Notify when available. 4 of 5.
I can set a notification so that when the person I'm chatting with becomes available, I'll be notified.
Manage apps. 5 of 5.
And then you'll see something called Manage Apps. We'll come back to that in a bit, but it's important to kind of understand how that can work or what can happen.
Chat list navigation region. Chat list preview.
So far we've talked about kind of 2 areas. Didn't focus too much on the activity feed, but it is there, and that's Control 1.
Feed is selected. Loading more messages. Start a new conversation.
The chat, Control 2.
Kelly Ford Microsoft Teams main window.
And in both cases,
Recent chats open. 2 of 2.
we arrow up and down, and then we press enter to do something.
Chat. Kelly
Right?
Ford.
If I wanted to chat with Kelly, as I've talked about,
Recent chat. Teams echo. Status
I
unknown.
want to talk, pick a different chat. It is super important that you remember that you have to press enter to pick a chat. Otherwise, you could end up sending a message to the wrong person. So I've kind of forgotten what else maybe Teams can do, and I'm going to use my go to home base key again.
Search region. Combo box. Type /@ for a list of commands.
Because that's Control E, and now I know where I'm tabbing. I'm starting over at a predictable location. I can hit tab.
Profile. App settings and more. Button menu.
There's that profile thing.
App bar. Use up or down arrow key. Chat toolbar toggle button pressed.
There's chat. I hit down arrow.
Teams toolbar toggle button.
Now there's this whole thing. So Teams has Teams. Let's press enter.
Pressed. General accessibility testing. Microsoft Teams. Main window. Teams and channels list navigation region. Teams and channels list preview. Your Teams open. 2 of.
So we heard the same thing about a list, and we can arrow up and down this list as well.
Accessibility testing team favorited. Hit space for more options. Open as pop-up. 1 of 2. General channel favorited. Hit space for more. 1. Webinar demonstration team favorited.
So this is a list of teams in my account, if you will. Teams are really comprised of what are called channels, right? So you might have a team that organizes around a range of items. For example,
General chat. Webinar demonstration team favorited. Hit.
we made a team for this webinar called Webinar Demonstration Team. Not necessarily original, but for organizational purposes, it's helpful. Inside of a team, you can have one or multiple channels. And really, a channel is just a way to organize conversations and other information.
General channel favorited. Hit space for more options as pop-up. 1 of.
Again, once you've kind of identified where you want to go, you press enter.
Webinar demonstration team. General channel. General webinar demonstration. Microsoft Teams. Main window. Webinar demonstration. General channel content. Main region. Start a new conversation. Type at to mention someone. Edit. Loading more messages.
So we heard that we went to an edit box, and we heard that we could start a new conversation. Now there are existing conversations, and if you want to read them, you press Shift Tab.
Threaded conversation with 0 replies from Teams demonstration. Cool. Hopefully it is always working. Started today at 9:59 a.m.
Now that's the newest item at the end of the list with down arrow. If I hit up arrow, I can go back through older conversations.
Threaded conversation with 0 replies from Teams demonstration. Surprised. Started today at 9:57.
So that was just an emoji, actually. You can hear I had sent a message with just a surprised emoji.
Threaded conversation with 0 replies from Teams demonstration. Added a new tab at the top of his channel. Here's a link. Started today at 8:28 a.m.
Keep track of what that said and just remember that.
Threaded conversation with 0 replies from Teams demonstration. Added a new tab at the top of his channel.
Added a new tab in this channel. It's important in a couple minutes.
Threaded conversation with 2 replies from Kelly Ford. What sort of content should we have for the webinar? Started on May 7th, 2020.
So here we hear something that finally says, hey, it's a threaded conversation with some replies. So this is perhaps the biggest difference between chats and Teams as far as conversations goes. Because a chat is kind of one or to many or one-to-one, but it's really you type a message, somebody else types a message, and it's all in one list. The replies are threaded, and if you want to explore them, now maybe I'm not interested in this, so I could just arrow past it, but if I want to understand what's in there.
Message from Kelly Ford. What sort of content should we have for the webinar? Sent on May 7th, 2020 at 8:53 a.m. Press enter to explore message content and use escape to shift focus back to the message. All replies expanded. Press down arrow to navigate to the messages. Press enter to collapse replies.
So there we hear, I hit down arrow and it says all replies expanded, and I can go into those replies.
Reply from Teams demonstration. A little of everything would be good. Sent on May 7th, 2020 at 8:54.
So there we hear a reply.
Reply from Teams demonstration. We didn't plan for a product plug in the demo, but life happens. Sent on May 7th, 2020 6:50 p.m. Press enter.
So that said we didn't plan for a bug. It's actually some content that we added when we were doing a rehearsal and we ran into a glitch. Some important reminder that, if you're using Teams and you run into issues, you can reach out to us at EDAD or EDAD at Microsoft.com, and we're here to try and assist you with your issues and take feedback on your experiences. Crystal and Sean will talk more about that throughout the webinar series. If I want to reply to any of these messages.
Reply from Teams demonstration. Menu, light, 1 of 6. Leaving menus, webinar demonstration, general channel content, main region. Reply from Teams demonstration. Reply, editing, edit.
And start typing a reply.
Sending ...
So
message sent.
I wrote how,
reply button. Reply from Teams demonstration. How is the content working? Sent today at 12:53 p.m. Press enter to explore message content.
How is the content working?
Reply from Teams.
If I'm done with this threaded conversation.
Threaded conversation with 3 replies from Kelly Ford. What sort of content should we have for the webinar? Started on May 7th, 2020, 8:53 a.m. PC.
And it closes. So again, this is really how the conversations work. Arrow up and down. You can expand a threaded conversation and arrow through those messages and hit R at any time that you want to reply.
Threaded conversation.
You will also notice, find that at the end of the threaded conversation, there is a reply button as well. Last, if you want to start a new conversation or kind of
start a new conversation, type at to mention someone, edit.
You have that same edit box. Now again, just like the chat edit box.
Menu, actions menu, format, press enter to expand, compose.
If we tab once, we have this whole toolbar again, where you can do things like format the message.
Attach, use left and right arrow key.
Attach something to it.
Choose an emoji, press enter key.
The emojis and everything else. So the editing experience, again, in chats and team conversations is fairly similar. So as I mentioned, we're going to go to the calendar. And the hotkey for going to the calendar is Control-4.
Calendar, Microsoft Teams, main window, calendar.
Now, before we really delve into the calendar, a note about hotkeys. You can press Control period at any time.
Virtual cursor on, dialog, keyboard shortcuts, mobile dialog.
And get a list of all the hotkeys for Teams. I also want to point out something else for those familiar with JAWS or other screen readers that you probably heard just happen. So by default, when you load Teams with JAWS in JAWS 2019 or newer, the virtual PC cursor, which is kind of used, as everyone who's familiar with that technology knows, for reading web pages, is turned off by default. And Teams works well in that mode. But at times, there's an extensive amount of content you want to read that might be a web page or a longer message, and obviously something like these keyboard shortcuts. So JAWS in 2020, the latest update, turns the virtual PC cursor on when you get to the list of hotkeys, and you can then treat it like a web page.
Grid with show keyboard shortcut.
Arrow up and down.
Go to search. Control E.
We heard 2 of them, right, that I've mentioned. Control E for go to search and Control period for show keyboard shortcuts.
Navigation heading level 2.
You can also use H for headings and jump to different areas of hotkeys. When you're done, you can press escape.
Virtual cursor off, profile, app settings, and more. Button menu, your profile picture with status displayed is presenting. App version is presenting. Press enter for app settings and help. Your status is set to do not.
Now,
profile,
you will
app
notice
settings.
we went away from the calendar, but that's okay, right? Because we know we can hit Control-4.
Calendar grid main region. May 8th, 1
Virtual
p.m.
PC cursor went off when we also hit escape.
May 11th,
There's a
1
lot
p.m.
that you can do with the calendar. I like the calendar. I'm a big fan of Excel as well because I like grids. They're very, very easy and logical to navigate with the keyboard.
May 8th, 1 p.m. to May 8th, 1
The calendar in Teams, here, I can use up and down arrow.
May 8th, 1:30 p.m. to May 8th, 2 p.m. 0 events.
To move through a day.
May 8th, 2 p.m. to May 8th, 2:30
And I
p.m.
can
0
use
events.
right and left arrow.
May 11th, 2 p.m. to May 11th, 2:30 p.m. 0 events.
To move
May 12th, 2 p.m. to May 12th.
forward a day at that time.
May 11th. Menu, jump to today's view button.
Here's something you heard us talk about, jump to today's view.
Go to previous week, May 4th.
I can then hit right and left arrow to go to other options.
Go to next week, May 18th, 2020 to May 2020. Work week, calendar views button.
And I can also choose different calendar views.
Leaving menus, calendar banner region, new meeting split button.
Also, we heard new meeting. If I wanted to schedule or start a meeting, I can hit this button. And you also heard this say this is a split button. And what that means is the button has 2 actions. If I press enter, it's going to open up the new meeting experience where I can then fill that out. If I were to hit Alt down arrow,
Menu, live event, 2 of 2.
it will open up where, for those who are maybe using Teams in a larger organization, or where you can have what's called a live event. And this is how you would start that, where you can set up a whole bunch of production things and add people as producers and lots of other multimedia camera and such.
Leaving menus, calendar banner region, new meeting split button.
So the other thing is,
Meet now button.
you can have an instant meeting and just press enter on this meet now and invite people right there with a meeting. Let's go back and talk about, because now you learned about split buttons, right? So you want to tell your friend or colleague how split buttons work. We'll go back to chat.
Kelly Ford, chat list navigation region, chat list preview.
And
PC.
we can hit in chat Control N at any time.
Chat Microsoft Teams main window, 2
To
edits.
start a
the name
new
of group.
chat. And we could type a name. And
Teams echo. Type request.
if I hit escape because we're not going to go through the chat, but if I typed a name, it would be looked up, and you can press enter and have that name filled out, and then press tab and start your chat. I'm going to go back to one of my chats.
Chat list navigation region, chat list preview. Recent chats open, 2. Chat, Kelly Ford, in the call. Last. Kelly Ford, Microsoft Teams main window.
In
Kelly
this chat,
menu,
some
action,
other
send
things
button.
you can actually do. So
Search
I'm
region, combo.
back to the chat I had with myself.
Profile, app settings. App bar, use up. Chat list navigation, filter control plus. Chat list preview. Region, change settings. Button, close button. Kelly Ford. Chat tab selected, 1 of 4.
Again, those tabs.
Add a tab button. Audio call button.
Audio call. So I can, from the chat, I can make an audio call.
Screen sharing button.
I can start screen sharing. The computer I'm using in this demonstration, I'm actually using 2 computers. The one I'm typing on right now doesn't have a camera. If it did, it would also allow me to make a video call. There are hotkeys as well for making calls, answering calls, and things like that. And I talked about one way to see what those hotkeys were, and that was control period. You can also go back to our search box.
Search region, combo box, type slash.
Type /
Slash combo box, edit combo, / activity C, / K, / PC keyboard shortcuts. Suggest.
And I typed K, and now you heard Teams say, C keyboard shortcuts. Press enter.
Virtual cursor on, dialog, keyboard shortcuts, mobile dialog, general heading level 2.
And that same thing. We are in
Navigation heading level 2, messaging heading level 2. Meetings, calls, and calendar heading level 2.
the keyboard list, and I hit H a couple times to go down to the headings.
Grid with 2 call, accept video call. Control Shift A, accept audio call. Control Shift S.
Right there, probably one of the more important keys. If someone's calling you, how do you answer it pretty quickly without having to tab around? Control Shift S.
Decline call. Control
If you
Shift
don't
D.
want to talk to the person, you can use Control Shift D. And you can read through all of these hotkeys.
Virtual cursor off.
Okay, we've talked a little bit about calls. How do you get into that area if you
PC.
want? Again, you can make calls from a lot of different places, but we're going to hit Control E to go to our home base.
Search region, combo box, profile, app setting, app bar, use up or down, calendar toolbar toggle, calls toolbar toggle button.
And then again, I tab twice. I'm using up and down arrow.
Press calls, Microsoft Teams, main window, main region, contact list preview, speed dial open, 1 of 0, favorites
And
open.
now I can explore this area with the arrow keys
Speed dial.
and get around. Your calling experience will also change depending on whether the Teams instance you're having actually lets you just call other people over the Teams, or if it lets you call out to an actual phone system.
Menu, profile picture of Kelly Ford. In the call, no available camera found. Call contact, more actions. 1 of
There's different things you can do here. So I hope this has been a little bit of information on how to get around in Teams. To recap, Control E,
leaving menus, search region,
home
combo box,
base,
profile, app settings, and more button menu, your profile,
space,
app bar, use up or call, profile, app, your
and
search region, profile, app, menu, set status, message, current, set status, save messages, settings, 5 of 10.
settings. We didn't go in here, but we'll
Leaving
Zip
menu.
in
Settings
real
total dialog.
briefly.
Privacy
All
tab.
the settings are fairly straightforward. One I want to talk about is notifications,
Selected.
because you can configure. I arrowed down and now I can go to notifications.
List box. Personal mentions only show.
For almost all the activities of Teams, you have generally one of a few choices.
Personal mentions only show feed button menu.
So, as an example, it can be only show in feed.
List box. Only show feed. Free banner and email.
A banner and email will send you as obviously an email, and also a banner is like a notification. The Teams notifications are not part of the Windows notification system right now, but you will still hear them. And
banner.
You could tab through all of these areas.
Personal mentions only show feed button.
We're going to hit escape. Now,
profile app settings and more.
A couple other important things before we do the full recap that I do want to point out.
Menu. Set status message current. Set status message 3 of 10. Save messages. Settings 5 of 10.
In settings, once again.
Leaving menus. Settings modal dialog. Your profile. Privacy tab. General tab selected. Theme tab. Default theme button tab selected.
Theme.
1 of 3.
Teams has a couple of themes that may be of interest to some folks. So we have the default theme.
Dark theme button tab 2 of 3.
We have a dark theme.
Application. Auto start application. Theme tab. High contrast theme
and
button
we have a
tab,
high contrast theme. And you can go into settings like this, pick general, and set them.
General tab selected. 1 of 6. Theme tab. High contrast theme button. Dark theme. Default theme button tab.
Another important thing for folks in Teams is it does have, like a lot of other programs these days, a built-in zoom function. So
profile app settings and more button. Menu.
Settings kind of menu off the profile.
Set stat. Save settings. Zoom out 1 of 3.
Zoom out.
Zoom in.
Zoom in. Zoom
reset. Leaving menus.
And if we were to use the keyboard shortcuts, we can also zoom.
Alert. Zoom 145%. Zoom 145%.
You heard zoom went up to 145%. Control minus.
Alert. Zoom 120%.
So
profile app settings and more button.
Again, we didn't get too far in our recap just yet, did we? Because there's a lot to discover in Teams and always new things coming. It's still a program under active development. So just always check out what's new. We have a lot of documentation on Teams at aka.ms/office accessibility and many other programs. But now to really recap for you, again, Control E, go home.
Search region, combo box.
Control 1,
feed is selected.
Feed, arrow up and down. Control 2,
chat,
Microsoft Teams. Arrow to the chat you want.
Recent chats open, 2 of 2. Chat, Teams echo, status unknown.
Enter to select that chat, use the edit box. Control 3.
General accessibility testing, Microsoft Teams, main window, Teams and channels list navigation, accessibility testing team, favorited, hits.
Arrow up and down your teams, pick a channel, do your activities. Control 4, calendar.
Calendar, Microsoft Teams, May 11th, 1 p.m. to
Control 5.
Main region, contact
again,
list
your phone. And we talked briefly about files, and I want to just mention this here. So those files that we looked at before were a part of an individual team. If we hit Control 6,
Word A sample document,
same experience, but a whole nother like file library in general for Teams. So here we are in the general file library for Teams. I hope this has been helpful. And now I'd like to return to Crystal and Sean, and thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kelly. I think this was really helpful, and I know our hope is that this will really give folks the confidence and the resources to start playing around with Teams. So yes, now it is time to jump into some Q&A. And again, these are some of the top questions that we've been receiving from customers lately. You can also submit additional questions to accwebinars@microsoft.com, and that's just via email. Crystal, can you give us the first question for Kelly?
Sure. Thank you, Sean. So Kelly, I know you showed several different ways to do this, but I think it would be good to review again, and definitely as a top question on how to get to keyboard shortcuts. Thanks, Crystal. Yes, there's a few ways, again, within the program, Control period or Control E
/keys. And also back on the Office Accessibility Center, outside of Teams, there's links and things for a whole bunch of information, not just keyboard shortcuts, but how to do a lot of different tasks with Teams that you can read.
Great. That's great. Thanks, Kelly. Sean, you want to go next?
Sure. Kelly, I know you covered this kind of near the tail end of this, but I think it's a really powerful way to customize the information you get from Teams. So where can you change and customize notification settings again?
So again, our home base, Control E,
Search region,
tab once,
profile, app settings, and more button menu.
In some cases, you might have to tab twice. So anything I talk about, try to remember the concepts and not specific numbers of tabs, because if you use Teams in some configurations, you might have multiple organizations, and there could be a tab stop between these.
Menu,
But press space,
set status, save settings, 5 of
go
10.
into settings with an enter,
Leaving menu, setting, privacy tab, notifications tab, 3 of 6. Selected.
And really there are,
List box.
I haven't actually ever counted, but
team mentions only show feed button.
you may decide what you want at different times, right? So I can
List box.
pick
only
any
show
one of these settings, press space on it.
Off. 4 of 4. Only show banner. 2. Banner and email.
Or
1 of 4.
email.
Team mentions only show.
There's a lot of customization you can do.
Cool. Thanks, Kelly. Crystal, do you have another one?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Can you review some of the other platforms that Teams is available on?
Sure. We're using the full desktop client on Windows for Teams. You can also use Teams just within your web browser on pretty much any platform that you can use a web browser by going to teams.microsoft.com and signing in. There's also clients for many other devices, the iOS client. We have many folks that use that and the desktop client. Just depends on what you want to do. Teams is also available for Android and for the Macintosh. And so you can really pick and choose. In my own case, for example, I'll frequently attend a meeting and listen on my phone. And then if I feel I'm going to be participating a lot in the chat or something, I'll also join on my desktop where I'm more comfortable typing longer messages.
That's a great tip. Thanks. Sean, you got another one?
I do. Kelly, this is one that I know we've been getting a lot from folks. Some folks may have noticed that sometimes when someone shares content or you switch between apps, it seems like Teams freezes or hangs. Do you have any insight on that?
Yes, we have gotten a lot of questions on this, and I know we've had customers that have been doing a lot of different things when they are using Teams. And basic symptom is basically feels like the program has quit responding because any keyboard command you press doesn't really read anything or appear to do anything. There's actually a fairly straightforward workaround while the Teams engineering team works on fixing this issue. If you take an action to kind of resize the window, Teams will then again start reading with your screen reader. The fastest way to do this is to hit Windows and up arrow. That's the Windows hotkey to maximize a window. In some cases, your window might be maximized already. So if you add an additional Windows down arrow and another Windows up arrow, that should get you going. And if you follow MSFT Enable on Twitter and you look back a little bit, we did mention this issue there, and I'm sure that when we have a solution that doesn't require you to use those hotkeys, we'll be mentioning it on Twitter and other locations as well. I know the team is working hard on fixing the situation.
Thanks, Kelly. Crystal, I know we might have a few more questions. Do you want to do the next one?
Yeah. Can you just go ahead and tell us the keyboard shortcut for muting and unmuting? Is there one?
Yes, Control-Shift-M will mute and unmute
Chat messages banner and email button. Profile
Your
app settings. More button.
microphone.
Your microphone is muted.
Awesome.
Microphone is unmuted.
Now you will.
Thanks, Kelly. Sean, do you want to take maybe one more question?
Yeah, that works. So Kelly, I know in some cases the screen readers have made choices for which mode that they're in at different times. Can you talk about any scenarios where you might need to change that?
Sure. And when you say mode, Sean, I mean, I think we all know you're talking about, again, when I talked about the JAWS virtual PC mode on or off, or narrator scan mode on or off, NVDA's browse mode on or off, and things like that. And it's really about how do you want to interact with something? Do you want to tend to use the kind of default application keyboard experience, or do you want to interact with larger amounts of content that don't necessarily take keyboard focus to read? If you're reading really long messages, or you might want to turn on the virtual mode of the assistive technology that you're using. Teams, as we went around today, we used the default kind of Teams keyboard navigation, but whether you're on the web or the desktop application, Teams also does use a lot of the markup that you may be familiar with, like headings and other tags, to make the experience readable when you're in the virtual mode or equivalent in your screen reader. And they try to support both modes. And actually, if you go out to the website for Teams help, a lot of the support articles actually write how to do tasks in both modes. You'll see them called focus mode, and I believe the other term they used was browse mode, but I'm not 100% sure. But I know if you go out to the Teams help content, a lot of the articles talk about both of those modes. So we're trying to support, however people like to interact, and let you choose what works for you.
Thanks, Kelly. Crystal, do you want to go ahead and wrap up our Q&A, and then we can share some resources?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kelly. This demo was awesome, and really appreciate your time answering some questions. Before I toss it back to Sean, who's going to review some top resources, I do want to mention that we really, really, really depend and want and make decisions on your feedback. So if you have a chance, please fill out our survey on these webinars and go to aka.ms/webinar feedback. And there you can give us your feedback on this webinar, things we can improve, things you liked, if you'd like more topics, all of that is welcome. So Sean, do you want to go ahead and close us out with some of the resources we've talked about today?
Definitely. Yeah, so I know Kelly had mentioned a few resources while we were going through content today. One of them that I always love sharing with folks is the Office Accessibility Center, which is kind of the starting point for content for all things Office. So that's aka.ms/Office Accessibility. To learn more about webinars, see some of our archived ones, you can visit aka.ms/accessibility webinars. And you can also reach out to us on Twitter at MSFTEnable. And if you do need support, the Disability Answer Desk can help. And so our webpage is aka.ms/DAD. So we do look forward to delivering more webinars. And again, this is really all based on what you all ask for. So if you have feedback on future webinar topics, go ahead and share that at aka.ms/accessibility feedback. We're going to go ahead and wrap up for today. So thanks everyone for joining, and we'll catch you next time.